Hey, I'm Tommy Chong. Welcome to High on Homegrown.
Yes, everybody, and welcome to this week's Grow Guides from High on Homegrown, the cannabis podcast from Percy'sGrowroom.com. Just a quick reminder before we move into the episode, which is about temperatures and humidity for cannabis plants this week. On Monday, that's Monday coming up on the 23rd of May, we have a special birthday session with Tommy Chong. It's Tommy Chong's birthday on the 24th of May, but he's obviously going to be spending that day with family and friends in real life. But the day before, he's going to come and join us in our Zoom room on the 23rd of May on Monday at 9 p.m. UK time, 5 p.m. Eastern time, or 1 p.m. Pacific time. That's on Monday, the 23rd of May. Tommy Chong will be joining us live to have a birthday session. So if you want to come and have a birthday session with Tommy Chong live, where you can say happy birthday to him in the chat, say hi, have a chat with him, get high with Tommy Chong, then that's happening on Monday. Again, the 23rd of May at 9 p.m. UK time, 5 p.m. Eastern time, and 1 p.m. Pacific time. I hope we can see you there. It'll be fun if there was loads of people there to wish Tommy Chong a happy birthday, because he's the legend, the king of stoners. So make sure you're there to come and say happy birthday to him. And of course, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask him as well, then you can do that in the chat whilst he's there session with us. It's going to be super cool. I hope you can make it. But anyway, without any further ado, let's move on to this week's Grow Guides. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you learn something. I'll speak to you at the end of this. So, temperatures and humidity, it's very important to a cannabis plant. You know, if it's too hot or too cold, it's not going to grow properly. And if it's too humid in the grow room, then it's not going to be able to breathe properly. So this is what we're going to be discussing today. I mean, where do we even start with this? It's sort of complex because each different stage throughout the life cycle of cannabis plant, they prefer different levels of humidity. And it's good to give them that, but I like to keep things as simple as possible, so don't worry about this shit too much. And by giving you these numbers, I don't want anybody thinking about this is exact and you need to keep your cannabis plant at 26 degrees Celsius, otherwise it's gonna die. Don't want anybody thinking any shit like that. These are just levels which you want to aim for, but it's not massively important to have them dead on. A couple of degrees either way, and the plant should be happy enough. So don't get too concerned if you check your grow room and see that you're not dead on any of these numbers.
Yeah, that's a good point, because when we're talking about ideal conditions for cannabis is what we're going to give you the numbers for it. And the plant can actually exist way out of these ranges and higher and lower. It may not be in an optimal grow condition. It may grow a little slower, but it will live well outside of these ranges.
Yeah. So it's essentially all about the evaporation of fluid so the plant can breathe and eat. If you have the right temperatures and the right humidity, then the water will get shrunk up by the roots, move through the plant, and then evaporate through the leaves at a specific rate. And this is what you want to aim for. If you keep them levels right for the right stage of growth, then the plant's going to be very happy, eating a nice amount, drinking a nice amount, and growing at a good pace. So when you start off for the vegetative stage, let's say, when you're doing a seedling, the seedling doesn't have many roots and it needs to try and it can't drink too much water through the roots. So if you have it too dry in the air, then the water's going to be evaporating off that little stem too quickly, and it will dry the thing out too fast and it will die because it can't drink enough through the roots. So when you're at the stages where the plants are small with no roots, then you want to be having in very humid conditions.
Well, I mean, yeah, you can pretty much, that's correct. When the plant is young, you really want to keep it in an ideal conditions a lot more. You don't want to challenge the plant. So I think that's what Mackie's saying. Keep it at approximately 26 degrees light on with approximately 60-65% relative humidity for a seedling, and your plant will be pretty happy. But these are approximate numbers. Like Mackie said before, your plant's not going to die if you're at 59% humidity and 24 degrees Celsius. Your plant will be just fine. It just has to be close to those numbers.
So you might hear this term thrown around quite a bit called VPD, which is vapor pressure deficit. Does anybody want to explain what this is?
I'm not sure I know what it is.
I understand the theory. I cannot explain it too well. I mean, but I don't believe I'm the one who could explain it so everybody else can understand it. That's just it. I mean, it's basically the difference between the humidity in the ideal humidity area that the plant wants to be in and the area that you're in that it has to deal with. And, you know, the hard to say. Oh, I'm a bit lost for words here.
Well, it's pretty much the same as what I said, where the plant is drawing moisture in through the roots.
Yes.
It's moving through the plant and then evaporating out the leaves. This is essentially what the vapor pressure deficit is, right?
Right. And if the air is drier, it's going to lose more moisture through the leaves. And if the air is more humid, it's not going to need to lose as much moisture through the leaves.
VPD, I always think, of course, it's something that matters when it comes to growing plants. But if you have your temperatures and humidity in the right range, then the VPD should be working just fine. The plant will adjust and it will do whatever it needs to do to stay happy. And when you're growing cannabis at home as just, you know, you're growing weed for yourself and not commercially, not professionally, you don't really need to go through the extent of stressing yourself out, making sure that everything is within the correct VPD or anything like that. If you just have the correct temperatures and humidity for your plants at the right stage of growth, it will grow lovely. I mean, as we said, they just asked Marge what VPD is, and she doesn't know. She grows cannabis. She knows what she's doing. I don't really know what VPD is, and I don't monitor it in my grow room, but I've been growing weed now for like 12 years. It's not something that is majorly important to you growing. So don't take it too seriously and don't get too pissed off if you're not within the right range. Just try and get around to it. But again, if you keep temperatures and humidity within range, then it will be at the right levels for the VPD anyway. You say, Monkey?
I said, I've been burned by VPD. I mean, I don't monitor it strictly, but I was growing a G13 haze and everything looked right with the feed and the feed numbers looked correct. And the plants were basically telling me I needed a little bit more feed in there. So when I did the output, so when I raised the feed, the problem in the tent was this was still in veg and my humidity in that tent, it was a wintertime grow. The humidity was down somewhere in the low 30s, high 28%. And when I raised the nutrients, the plant started drinking more. It got a hold of more nutrients and overnight I got plant burn, poof, that quick. So the VPD caused the plant to drink more. There was too much nutrients in the water and I got nutrient burn almost instantaneous because I didn't follow the VPD chart correctly. In that case, I would have been wise to basically increase fertigation and not increase the feed. If I would have started giving it more water more often, it wouldn't have burned, but by raising the nutrient level and feeding it saltier water, it couldn't handle the fluid cycling and burned.
Yeah.
See, I was just going to say, I don't follow VPD either. You know, I've been growing for pretty close to the same as you, Mackie, and I find that as long as you're keeping it within I call it the Goldilocks zone, you're generally going to be okay. And you know, because VPD I look at as just another way to measure, you know, another way to keep a reference point, I suppose, on your grow and what's going on. But it is one of those, I think, harder to follow sort of charts. You know, especially if you're a newer grower, worrying about VPD. And it's one of those things too that if you focus on it too much and you worry too much about it, it's going to affect your grow because you're paying too much attention to it. Whereas if you just try and keep it in those zones and keep the plant happy overall, you're probably going to be in a better position.
You know, that's just give it the right temperature and within the right humidity and the plant will go fine. Yeah.
And Woody's made another good point there that the VPD does change throughout the day. So part of when you're checking your VPD, you really want to be checking it at the same time every time. Otherwise, you're going to get variance and it's going to be different. And then you're going to throw another spanner in the works.
Right. So we want to start off with the temperatures. Throughout the grow, around 26 degrees Celsius, which is, what's that in, that's about 65 to 75 in Fahrenheit, is it? You're saying 68?
26 is going to be closer to 90.
Is it? Oh yeah, it's 3 times, isn't it?
No, closer to 85. Excuse me.
Okay, so you can do the calculations 78. Online. 78. If you have the temperature around 26 degrees Celsius, 78 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the whole grow, the plant will be pretty happy. But don't be afraid if it's a couple of degrees either side. It's not going to be a massive difference. I mean, we've known of grows go up to, especially during the summertime, you can go up to 32 degrees C, and the plants will continue to grow. And it can go all the way down to 15 degrees Celsius and still continue to grow. And it will really stop growing and start having difficulty when it gets to about 12 degrees Celsius. So there's a big range for the plant to be at where it will get along just about fine. But once you get towards them end scales, which are far apart from each other, 15 degrees C on one side and 32, 33 on the other, that's where you'll start seeing your problems. So you can see there's quite a bit of leeway either side. So don't get too concerned, but aim for that 26 degrees throughout the whole grow, and you'll be pretty sweet.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually bumped a tent before and knocked the extractor offline for half a day or almost a full day. And the tent got up to like 35 centigrade, like 96, 97. Plant was fine.
If it's super hot, the plant's just going to drink more to try and keep itself cooler. So
it didn't even phase the plant. These things are tough. All you have to really do is just stabilize the temperature, give the plant a little extra water, and give it time. And it came back beautifully. So VPD is not going to kill your plant. Mm-hmm. You know, it can slow down your production. It can do, you know, maybe make your grow a little less efficient if you're off of it. But kind of like what Bubble Hawk's been saying, they'll just keep it somewhere in the safe zone, and you're good.
Around 26 degrees C is cool. So let's say that your grow room or your grow tent is too warm. What would you do to reduce the temperatures? You're going to use, I mean, there's obviously air conditioning, but that's an expensive setup if you're going to be using air conditioning. So usually people would turn up the speed of their extraction, if possible, to suck more air out, open a window to let more cooler air in, if that's possible. What other techniques would you recommend, anybody?
I think it depends on if it's too warm, is it warm and too warm and dry, or is it warm and humid? Because if it's too warm and dry, you can always use a I think you guys call them swamp coolers. We call them just air coolers here, and it's essentially just a big fan that draws air across a big sheet of like paper that's covered in, like, they just get soaked in water. And as that blows through, that then brings the temperature down, but it will also raise your humidity. So it's a good option for if you've got dry heat.
A lot of commercial growers will use swamp coolers in their greenhouses.
Yeah.
Efficient,
I find
cheap and efficient.
Yeah, it's cheap. I mean, look, it costs you what? So, you know, a couple of liters of water and a fan. Mm-hmm. You know, as opposed to running an aircon constantly.
Mm-hmm. You also have air conditioning, like we said, but that's going to be expensive. And if you do come to using an air conditioner, then don't get the ones where you have to put inside your grow room, because they'll just produce heat themselves, put it out into your grow room, and it'll just make it warm. And it just is expensive nowadays. You don't want the device fighting itself, so you have to have the air conditioner outside of the grow space, blowing air into the grow space, or being sucked in through the extractor.
In my case, I grow in an air-conditioned space. It is my workshop, and the entire workshop is air-conditioned. And if you can do that, that's going to be your most efficient way to do it.
Nice.
You're not fighting anything. You know, the space that it's in is insulated correctly, and your tent's inside of that space. And so you have a very good give and take. The lung room works really well in that situation.
So then when it comes to keeping the grow room warm, I mean, that's pretty simple. Marge, you must have that trouble a lot living up in Canada.
Keeping it warm?
Yeah.
Well, with my micro grows, not really.
Right.
Just because, like, I mean, the house is heated, so I'm just doing it in a closet. As long as the house is at a reasonable temperature, and we're not trying to like save money or something by keeping the thermostat down, it's usually not a big problem for me.
Yeah, and that's it. If you're growing at home, where like most of us will be doing, then just having the house heated is usually plenty. But along with what heat the light is going to add to the grow space as well, that is usually plenty to keep the plant happy at a decent temperature.
Cannabis plants will be happy in the same temperatures that we're happy in.
Maybe just a little bit warmer though.
A little bit warmer maybe, but not too bad.
But even that, when you just said like some of the heat from the lights themselves might make up the difference that you need anyway.
It will, yeah. That's how I do it in my climate controlled space. Like Becky was saying, technically this is slightly cold for the lights on phase, but when you turn the lights on in the tent, it raises it just a few degrees, which is plenty, and everything's right in the ideal zone.
But then it comes to the nighttime temperatures as well. 'Cause when the lights are on, it's going to add heat, but you don't want to get too cold at nighttime either. So just try and keep it above 15 degrees at all times. You don't really want to head below 15 degrees because they'll start suffering problems until it gets to 12 degrees and then it will stop growing. So just be careful what you're doing there. Keep it above 15 at all times and preferably around 20 at night and 26 during the daytime. That's like, they'd like that a lot if you can do that.
Well, I mean, look, and the other side of that is don't freak out if you're like 28, 29 degrees. Like, I mean, yeah, it's not ideal, but I just suffered through that with the Northern Lights grow because we had a summer here that we had weeks on end that were like, 35, 40 degrees outside just every second day. And trying to keep a grow tent cool in that it's nightmare fuel. It is just almost impossible. So that Northern Lights copped 28C plus during the days, up to 31C at times without issue. It ran the whole thing through, didn't bother it at all.
Back in the days of using HPS and shit, some growers will still be using high intensity discharge lighting. That shit can really increase the heat of a grow room. And I've been up to 35, 36. And if you're at that stage, if it's too hot and you've done everything you already can, added more air into the grow room, more fans, bringing in cooler air, and it's still, you've done everything you can, just stop checking the temperature. There's nothing you can do about it, and it's just going to stress you out too much. So don't get too carried away with this. Don't stress yourself out growing. You won't enjoy it so much. It's just one of those things. And just know, as long as your plants are properly watered, they're going to be fine. If you're in DWC and the reservoir keeps getting too warm, that will have an effect on the plants. So that's what you have to watch out for the most when the temperatures get too high, is if you're in full hydro. But that's easily changeable. You can get yourself an aquarium cooler. Just drop yourself an aquarium cooler in, and that will keep the temperature of the reservoir down. But if you don't have one of them, just freeze a couple of, the 1 liter Coca-Cola bottles or fizzy drink. It doesn't have to be Coca-Cola. And just get 3 or 4 of them and put them in the freezer to freeze, and then just drop one into your reservoir. And when it's melted, you'll have others to replace it with, and just recycle, go around and that will help keep the temperature in the reservoir down. But when it comes to the air temperature around the plant, generally, if you're okay in it, that your plant's going to be okay in it. Just keep the air going around. Make sure the plants are well watered and the medium doesn't dry out. So that's and keeping it warm as well. Like I would use an oil rad, an oil rad radiator. They seem to be the best things. Some people like to use a blow heater, but they can be expensive when it comes to the electricity usage. But what else is this? Like greenhouse heaters you can buy. They're pretty cool. But,
got heat mats as well.
Yeah, heat mats are a cool thing. Do you use anything to keep it warm, March, or just what you've got in house there?
Right now, just what I have in house.
Cool.
Yeah. I only have 2 at the moment, like 2 micro grows, because out of the 4, 2 were male. So I had to.
Oh, lame.
I know. Boo.
It happens.
Yeah.
It's all right. Just grow the females twice as big, ain't it? You'll be fine.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So there's lots of different ways to heat up the grow room. Just try and conserve as much energy as possible whilst doing it. And I think one of the most efficient ways is using an oil rad heater, because that will get hot. You can turn the power off and it will stay hot for a while it's still sitting there in the grow room. So it's essentially producing free heat at that point. You can control the temperature nice and easy by linking all this stuff up to like an Ecotech controller. What do you use? What's that one you use, Monkey?
For what now? Exactly.
To control the temperature. Control extraction. Inkbird is what I'm thinking.
Inkbird. Inkbird. Yeah, I don't even use Inkbirds. For temperature control, I just use what's on the AC Infinity fans, the AC controller, AC Infinity controllers. It works really well. Super simple. Nothing to it.
So then we have humidity. When humidity is a bit different, because in the early stages, in the seedling stage and early veg stage, you want to have reasonably high humidity around 65%. That's just that's what the young plants prefer, because their roots aren't too big. But when you're heading into the middle of the vegetative period and you can bring the humidity down. And then when you're in flower, you want it to be much lower, like between 45 and 55% is best in flower. And that's essentially just to try and reduce the chances of any mold germinating, because the more humid it is in a grow room, the more likely it is a mold spore will germinate. So to make sure that doesn't happen, always have air moving around the grow room with a couple of good fans, and try to keep the humidity under 55% during the flowering stage. But
airflow is the most important, I think, when it comes to high humidity. As long as you've got the air moving, there's less chance it's going, because it's the stagnant air that that mold's going to grow in. So if you've got a fan under canopy, a fan above canopy, and your extraction running, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be fine. For sure. Even if you are seeing sort of, because I mean, I'm seeing now, and I'm in I would say late flower on this wedding cake, and I'm seeing 60, 65 in that tent. It's just the outside can't, and I've got a dehumidifier running constantly in there, so I've just got the airflow running, and there's not even a hint that there's any mold in that tent. So but yeah, airflow is probably the biggest thing for for humidity.
That's it, them starlight air pockets, man. That's where that mold will grow. So just keep the fans moving at all times. Extracting that old air, that's also very important. And making sure that the humidity is kept low, man. It's very important, that shit. In the later stages of flower, when you're going through the early stages, it's not so bad. But try and keep it below 60%, because mold can still germinate on plants without buds on them. If you have stale air and shit on the stems, on the branches, you might get mold show up, powdery and mildew.
I like to actually go somewhere in the 40s or even high 30% late flower in my tents if I can get it, and help stop that bud rot and that powdery mildew and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's just when the humidity is lower like that, the plant will drink more, won't it?
Yeah, but in late flower, the last couple of weeks, it's going to shut down drinking anyway. So it's just, as it's ripening toward the end, that's when I usually am really cautious about bud rot and mold.
Yeah.
And so that's when I'll go ahead and after that plant stops drinking so much, I'll lower the humidity in the entire building and just let everything hang down low.
Right. So when it comes to humidity, you'd use a hygrometer or hydrometer to check the humidity in a room. It'll tell you a certain percentage it will be measured in. And it's
hydrometer.
Hydrometer. That's one. I got hydrometer. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I said.
Yeah, English versus American. There you go. We're done. Hydrometer. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that will give you the percentage of what the humidity is around the plant. So make sure it's in the right place. Sometimes you get these things that got a probe on, like a wire, and they have a little a metal tip on the end, and that will measure the temperature. But I think it's only the actual square thing that will measure the humidity. The prong at the end doesn't measure the humidity. That's the actual device itself. So make sure that's in the middle of the grow room amongst the plants, so we can get a good reading of what the humidity is.
Yeah, I always like to keep that right at the top of the plant, so I can see what the very top of it's looking like, the temperatures and the humidity's there.
I used to rest it on my scrog. It's beautiful.
I shoot for one up top, one down bottom.
Nice.
But I got two of the Inkbird ones. They're like, they connect to your Wi-Fi on your phone and everything. So I've one down the bottom, one up the top, and a visual one I can just check if I open the tent. So
for a long time, for me, I haven't even bothered checking. I don't check my humidity and I don't check my temperature anymore, and I haven't done for a long time, because for a long time they were just within range and I don't really need to do anything to adjust it. Yeah.
Yeah, once you're set up, I think, and you've done a few runs and you get them under your belt and you sort of understand how your setup runs, it's a lot less stressful, because you kind of know how it's going to go. You're going to get through the grow without any issues, or with very little issues, and the issues that you do have, you understand and know how to combat anyway. So, I'm very rarely watching that temperature and humidity unless I know, where we've got, it's been pissing down for a week here, then okay, I'm going to be watching that humidity. Or if we've had ridiculous heat, same thing. But as a rule of thumb, I'm checking it maybe once a day, make sure it's in range, but it's not, I'm not constantly watching it.
Right. So when the humidity does go off as well, because that will happen, sometimes you need it to be more humid than what it is, and sometimes you need to be less humid. So to add moisture to the air, you'd use a humidifier. Does anybody use one of these? I've never had to use one. I've always had good levels.
I have I got some small ones that I use when I need them, which is like if I'm starting seedlings in the wintertime or early spring when it's still dry air around, I'll probably plug that in and run that for a week, maybe 2 weeks, a little bit, just to get the humidity up in the tent. I didn't used to use them, but I started doing it and found that I get a lot better growth rate on the seedlings if I keep the humidity high early on.
Yeah.
And you use one, Bob?
No, I don't really have to. Again, we've been struggling high humidity more than anything else. But generally when I've got a low humidity zone, it's because it's hot and dry. Right. So, in that case, I'll throw the swamp cooler on, and that'll bring it back up. But I do like to shoot for sort of 60, 65 in as a seedling right through veg. And it's not really until sort of mid to late flower I'm looking at trying to bring those numbers down, and anything under 50 in late flower I'm happy with. But as far as putting as bringing that up, I mean there's a few different options. You can always cowboy it and go a big pot of warm water and a towel. If you don't have a humidifier, just use a fan blowing across. It'll do at least raise it a little bit for you if you've got really dry issues in there. But I've never had to use one specifically. Like I've never gone out and bought one, but I've gone out and bought a dehumidifier. So
well, fabric pots will raise your humidity because the water is evaporating out of the sides of the fabric pots. So if you're having trouble in using standard pots, that's one way to get your humidity up, is maybe change to fabric.
That's another good point.
Yeah, man. Anything you're doing, because you must be low humidity where you are, Marge, when it gets cold.
No humidity.
Yeah, I don't really do anything, honestly. I just keep them in the closet and they do their thing.
Pretty
I think because they're so small,
really.
it's like, they're so small that they don't seem to demand much of me, which I really like, which is why I recommend the micro grow for busy people who don't have a lot of space either. Like,
once you get them started blooming, you just basically back off the micros and they do their thing.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, man. And then we have
highly recommend them.
Sorry, Marge.
No, go ahead.
And then you have decreasing humidity when the humidity gets too high. Now, usually this can be as simple as just increasing your extraction to bring some of the humid air out faster, because it can build up in there, especially after you've just watered. Like Monkey said with the fabric pots, though, if you've watered your plants and you have fabric pots, that's going to jump up the humidity for a little while. So you can just speed up fans if that's the case, or you can use a dehumidifier if you find that necessary. If the humidity levels start going over 70%, then you definitely want to start getting the dehumidifier out and stopping that. Especially if you're in flower. If you're in flower and you're above 65%, then you definitely need to start doing something about that as well and get a dehumidifier out. But it doesn't really happen very often that humidity gets that high. Or rain outside, the thunderstorm or something like that. But these things pass, If you just keep a good airflow flowing around the tent the whole time to make sure that there's no stale air pockets, then the mold is less likely to germinate, and it won't grow.
Well, I grow in small tents, and I do notice humidity spiking toward the end of my grows when I'm in late flower. Smaller the tent, I think it's easier for that humidity to spike. And it was my choice to start in small tents, so it's something that I have to fight on a regular basis. And so sometimes I will have to use a dehumidifier in my room to get that space down maybe in the 40s so that I can increase the fan and lower it that way. But I mean, I have seen that frequently in my small tents, that toward late flower, I start seeing spikes in humidity.
I see similar stuff, but that's why I've got a dehumidifier. So I'll dehumidify the room rather than, but I don't put it in the tent because it's blowing warm air and stuff as well. That's another big thing with that sort of thing. But rarely do I have an issue with the bigger tent. It's, if I'm going to have a humidity issue, it's going to be with the 4x4 or the 80x80. It's always the smaller two of the tents. And I tend to find it's nighttime, you'll get that massive spike.
Right after the lights go off.
Right
after the lights off. Bang.
Yeah. And that's the other side of that too, is we were talking about, raising humidity with your pots and things like that. Like if you're seeing high humidity, and it's only for a portion of the day, that's likely the culprit. So it's something, you know, don't stress out immediately and try change everything. Let it settle, because it's going to spike and come up and down pretty much throughout the whole day. It's nature. It's nature. That's what it does. You know, it's what the earth does. So as long as you're keeping it as close to those values as you can, I suppose is the best idea.
And just introduce some fresh air by opening some windows, opening some doors, maybe, you know, increase some extraction. Get a smaller intake vent. So you say you have a 5-inch extraction, then get a 4-inch extraction fan and put it in so it's blowing air into the grow tent as well, and have it intaking from somewhere drier, like by the window or somewhere cooler. That kind of thing works as well. You know, just pushing the air through it makes sure that the air exchange rate is higher.
Yeah,
that can help a lot. Just keep fresh air flowing in as much as possible, and it shouldn't get too humid anyway. This is why you would tend to use like a cup or a propagator when you're using seedlings and cuttings, because you want the humidity to be high. So you put this cover over them to stop the air escaping so much, and then the humidity rises in there. So if you just let fresh air in to any room, the humidity should drop unless it's crazy hot outside and it's just rained. And then you can be at like 99%. Like, I don't get that. Shouldn't we be like swimming if it's 99% humidity? That don't mean water, right?
No, that just means how much air, moisture the air can hold.
But it ain't holding much at 98%.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, not much more anyway.
Exactly. It's holding almost all of it. Yeah.
Like I've opened my 4x4, especially when you've got CO2 and stuff running. And if you've got that bang on in the Goldilocks zone, you can open that tent in the morning and the walls are moist. You know, like it's usually early morning I'll find it. Or, you know, and because I don't go in and check my tents once the lights are off, but that's generally when it's going to happen. I'll open it up and yeah, it's just high humidity all night. And the CO2, because you're sort of running a little bit more heat with the CO2, and you can take advantage more of that extra the extra humidity in there. So, but it's like a little mini rainforest. You open it up and you can tell. But like even that, you know, I've had that go for all the way through veg with autos and it'd be fine. There's no issue. But air's moving constantly. It's getting extracted. It goes out of the room. Fresh air's coming in. So
that's the most important thing, man. You can't stress that enough. Always keep fresh air rolling around the grow room all the time. They never turn them fans off. They need to be oscillating, blowing for the whole grow, and the air always needs to be extracted. But remove the old shit, man, and you shouldn't see mold. But it can still happen. It's rare, but it does. But as long as you keep the levels correct and the fresh air moving, you should be okay. So again, just throughout the whole grove, really, you want to be aiming for around 26 degrees Celsius. Would you say, Monkey, was like 76 degrees Fahrenheit? Or did you say 86?
78.8 is what it said.
Right. So just
according to Siri.
Oh, better ask Google.
Boo. I knew you'd throw that one out there, you know, Mr. Apple lover.
I love Apple. I love apples. What I was going to say, fuck, I forgot what I was going to say.
How you like them apples?
Yeah. But yeah, just try and keep it around them levels. And then when you get up to flower, then you can make it a little bit cooler if you want to. I don't know, some people do that. But just do what's best for you. But if the plant looks too hot, then make it cooler. And if the plant looks too cold, then make it warmer. You know, you can generally tell if the plant's too hot by the leaves, or do something called canoeing, which is where they curl up and start to look like a canoe. So just keep an eye out for them signs. And if you see those signs, it means it's too warm. And that the plants will tell you if it's too warm for them better than any thermometer will, because some plants can handle it much warmer than others. Some will be happy at 32 and some will be dying at 32. So just, it depends on your plant. So keep an eye on them and they'll tell you if it's too warm. And if it's too warm, then check the temperature and see where you're sitting at, because then you can make a note of it and try not to aim for them levels again. And
as it's been mentioned, these plants are very able to adapt to your environment. So don't freak out if you can't get perfect conditions. Just get as close as you can, and the plant's going to do great. It's going to find its own. It's going to grow perfect for you. Just try to get as best or as close as you can. That's all I have to do.
That's right. And when it comes to humidity, in the early stages, 65% is cool for seedlings, but around 60% during veg is fine, 55 to 60%. But you want to be aiming below 50% when you're in the flowering stage, just to make sure that there's less chance of mold germinating, and that will help the plant drink more as well because it's trying to sweat and perspire through the leaves. You know, that whole VPD thing again. But that's about it. You know, if you just keep it within the levels, and the whole growth should go fine. The plants will tell you if there's a problem.
Mhm.
But is there anything
Usually.
else to talk about with when it comes to temperatures and humidity? I don't think so. I think we're good, right? We don't know how
I
to
think that pretty
increase
much covers it.
and decrease it. And of course, if anybody has any questions, then you can always head over to PercySquirrelroom.com and we'll be able to answer some questions in the forum for you if you want to ask so. But we have got some questions that we'll cover before we finish up. We've got one from Bogon, this is your kind of thing. This is Monkey, about buffering cocoa.
Okay.
There's 5 separate questions, but I'll ask them all at once because just sum it all up. You know, how do you do it, and what's the process? What can you add, like Canazyme? Can you add Canazyme to it? How many times can you reuse cocoa? Is there any other use before you just put it in compost? And ratios of buffered cocoa to fresh cocoa.
Well, this is actually pretty cool because Bubble Hawk does his slightly different than me, but we both buffer cocoa from time to time. So you'll get more than one answer here, I'm sure. How do you buffer cocoa? I guess that's the first question.
Yeah.
Buffering cocoa is basically, if you get your cocoa in a brick form or any type that has not been buffered, that means that when it was collected, it probably still has a good bit of sodium chloride in that cocoa. And it's chemically bonded. What you need to do is you need to soak that cocoa in a CalMag solution, because the CalMag has a stronger ionic attraction to the cocoa. It's going to replace the sodium chloride that's stuck to your cocoa core and replace it with stuff that we need, necessarily CalMag. So after if your cocoa is hydrated, you're going to soak your cocoa in 1.5 times the strength that's listed on the bottle of CalMag, and you can use it in just regular tap water. You can use rainwater, but you want to soak that cocoa for about 4 to 8 hours, and then you're going to drain that, and then you're going to soak it again to double buffer it, just to make sure that you've got all the sodium chloride released from the cocoa, and you've got that CalMag bound correctly to the cocoa, so that your cannabis plant can uptake the CalMag correctly from it. It's not the only way to do it. Now, after you finish buffering it, of course, you get it out of the CalMag solution. You want to make sure you wash it with clean water before you use it for anything else. Now, that's how I do it. Bubble Hawk does it quite differently. He does it, I believe, in his fabric pots, and we'll let him tell you how he does it.
Yeah, so I will rinse my cocoa to start. So I'll get it in the brick form and I'll break it up in a big wheelbarrow, fill that full of water so it'll bring in some moisture and obviously soak up that moisture. Then I'll put it across a big screen and I'll hose out all of the smaller crud and the sand and the rocks and everything else that comes with it. But then I'll actually put that washed cocoa into the 5-gallon bags I'm going to use. And then I'll actually soak them with the 150% ratioed CalMag in that overnight. Generally, I leave it for 8 to 12 hours. I find, it doesn't really matter because I'll then pull it out, rinse it through, and then buffer again. So I still double buffer, but I rinse in between. Reason I rinse is to get any of that excess stuff that's just sitting in the medium after you've buffered it, because you're going to, when sitting in that solution, it's going to sit in its own salt. Once that salt comes out of the medium itself and out of the cocoa, it's got to go somewhere. So it's going to be sitting there. So I'll rinse that out. And then, double buffer again. So I'll hit it twice with the solution. After the second solution, I'll take it out, completely rinse it through. Now I rinse it through with pH water, and I use rainwater for that. That's the last rinse. In the middle and everything in between, I can use normal tap water. It's not an issue. But yeah, so that last one will be rinsed with pH clean water. And then before I plant anything in it, very light nutrient solution. So usually I'll use a like a sea salt, which would be like risotonic for you guys. If you it's the same sort of level. It's just a seaweed solution that I'll pop in there, along with a very light a very light dose of the nutrients I'm going to use before I plant anything in it. But that's basically it.
Good man. Nice.
Sounds about right.
Mm.
And as far as reusing your cocoa, that's a little bit different. Biggest problem with reusing your cocoa is getting rid of most of the roots that are in it, and that's not an easy task. It can be done, but I'm going to say basically you're going to have to figure out how to do it on your own, because everybody who does it somewhat differently. But you need to take the cocoa out of the pot, remove the root ball, and get as much of the root out as you can before you start the process. Otherwise, if you leave too much of that root back behind, it can start rotting. It can cause you problems with fungus gnats. It can create a strange pH situation in your soil. You really want to get the roots out as best as you can.
Yeah.
And then after you get the roots out, then you want to rebuffer the cocoa before you reuse it again.
Yeah, that's another point. You really got to wash that stuff out. It's copped, however many weeks of you putting in salt-based nutrients for, every day. It's going to have some locked in there that you're going to have to get out. And the biomass left over from the root and stuff, the roots and things like that, it's the main reason I don't reuse cocoa. I'm not saying you can't. I have done it, and I have got a diary on Percy's. Actually, it's the Northern Lights diary. That was reused cocoa. Mm-hmm. Same thing, but that's the issue you run into. You run into things like there's now rotting biomass in that medium, so you're going to have other bugs and things coming into it. So yeah, it can be a bit of a nightmare to use, reuse cocoa, but it can be done if you're in a pinch and you either can't source it, can't afford it, or whatever, or just want to make use of what you've got because it's laying around. Definitely you can reuse it, but yes, rebuffer.
And there is a guide over on Percy's to show you how to buffer cocoa if anybody needs any more information on how to do that.
Yeah.
Sorry,
my rule for cocoa reuse, I used to reuse it just wholly, regrow a plant and reuse cocoa. I was starting to get some problems with that because after the cocoa gets used a few times, it does start breaking down a bit. So now my new rule is basically no more than 50% used cocoa and at least 50% brand new cocoa in a pot. When I do that, I don't have any problems.
Yeah. Usually that's the way to do it. Because it breaks down as the roots move through it, and it gets beaten around. It's gonna and you get more of that peat, that real peaty sort of thing in it as it breaks down, and that's the sort of stuff you don't want in that medium when you're going for cocoa, which is why you wash it in the first place, I suppose, to get all of that out, because you want the bigger pieces. But I'm the same. I generally try new runs, just new bag of cocoa. It's cheap enough to go and get a 90-litre brick, and that'll do 4 or 5 gallon pots with the perlite. So, I just go and buy another one, and then I'll reuse the old cocoa in my garden. So I'll go and put that out on the top of my lawn, and within a couple of months, it's grown back over. You wouldn't even notice, except for a couple of random pieces of perlite.
Worms like it, man. If you want to make a worm bin, then use that cocoa for their worm bedding. They'll live in there for a while. You just put stuff on the top. So start a worm bin, everybody. If you haven't done that, worm bins are super fucking cool. And a nice way to get rid of cocoa. Yeah. But is that all the questions answered there for the buffering cocoa? I think that's cool, right? I think everything's covered there. Then we have one from Jalert. Hi everyone. Thought it'd be interesting to hear the panel's thoughts on how to properly light-proof the grow room for when growing in residential areas. I've never seen anyone talking about that when I first started, and ended up turning lights off every time I wanted to open the tent.
Okay.
But now after putting light-proof plastic in between the 2 roll-down blinds, I worry about the neighbors thinking I'm never home. Fuck them, nosy bastards. Anyway, sorry, Bubba Hop.
I was going to say, for me, I actually just hang a couple of sheets up behind. They're just vertical blinds. So if I just leave the vertical blinds and I open that tent, the entire neighborhood's going to know that something's going on in there. So I put a couple of like a big king sheet and a couple of towels up behind those, so that the light doesn't hit the back of the verticals. So it sort of goes around the outside. So you still got a bit of light glow going on, but it's not over the top, because I'm trying to kind of eliminating the majority of that light hitting the back of those blinds and sort of, spotlighting the room, if you know what I mean.
Is there anything you do there, Marge?
I know when we had our grow room before, like the room faced out into a yard, so it wasn't really as much of a big deal, but we definitely did cover up the windows. And then we also put like the door to go into the room. We put like a strip along the bottom of the door, so you couldn't see any, like around the actual entire frame of the door, so you couldn't see any light coming out of that either. And it worked really well. Like you couldn't tell that we had a grow room in there, which is important sometimes. I mean, sometimes you just don't, even though I live in a legal place, you just don't want your neighbors knowing what you're doing, because there's a guy across the street from me, and I'm pretty certain he had a grow room in one of his upper rooms because of the brightness of the light and the hours that it was always on. And he should have done a better job, because that window was facing the street. So it's like anybody who kind of had any experience growing weed probably knew what he was doing in that room. So yeah, just cover it up, and don't forget things like, door frames and stuff like that, depending on what you're doing, because you're just not wanting other people in our house knowing what was happening either. Like, if you had somebody come over or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I use blackout curtains over mine. So when I open up the door, it's like the curtain's draped behind me. So it kind of stops any light from escaping out anyway, which is pretty cool. Just like hanging a big blackout curtain over it, and use safety pins on the top, and that keeps it clipped in place. Make sure it doesn't fall off, and that stops a lot from escaping out and bouncing around the room. But yeah, just keeping the windows covered as well. That works best, man. You don't want any light leaking out.
I remember I had a concern when I first started growing, because I was using blurples and was growing in a shower. And when I was outside in front of the house, I could notice at nighttime some of that blurple light coming, through the crack in a door, through a window kind of thing. And so, yeah, that can be problematic. It wouldn't have bothered me one bit if it would have been regular full spectrum lights, but that blurple definitely.
Fish tank, man. It's a nice little fish tank.
I don't know about blurple now.
Some of them fish like that blurple blue light. You know what I'm saying?
But what I've decided I run my lights during the day. That way, when I open my tent, it's sunlight outside, and you don't see the bright lights.
Yeah, same.
So
Majoritively from, I think my lights come on now about 7 a.m. and then they'll go off round about 1 a.m. So between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m., I'm usually trying to get some sleep anyway. So I'm not going to be in that room. And during the day, if I open the tent, you wouldn't know.
That's it.
SG2 asked here as well before we wrap everything up. So question, if you have everything spot on, will the THC content be more than a horrible cycle with everything going wrong? So most likely, mate. Yeah, if the plant's grown happily and healthily with no problems throughout its life cycle, then it has everything it needs to produce all the good stuff which it wants to do.
That's the commercial grow theory, and I have to agree with it. There is a bro science that says if you're mean to your plant, it's going to be stronger. But I don't. I think if you're nice to your plant, that it's going to grow bigger and stronger.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, there's certain conditions that you can induce to make, for example, having a strong fan blowing at it. It's not going to like that at first, but that's going to encourage it to grow stronger, thicker stems so it can support bigger flowers towards the end of the grow. If you introduce more UV, then the plant's going to produce more THC and resins to try and prevent that UV from damaging its DNA in the cells. So there's certain things you can do to make the plant grow in a particular way, but it's all treating it good. You need a good, healthy plant in order to produce good, healthy buds. So just always be nice to the plant. Yeah.
I think you're right on with that. The happier the plant, the better it's going to be overall, because it's not just about THC content. It's, you've got all the other cannabinoids and terpenes and everything else that are in there. Those all rely on that plant to be running happily to produce those in bountiful amounts, So happier the plant, the better the yield, and the better the
everything.
What's the word? Yeah, better everything. That's the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah. Well, that's all the questions then. We don't have any more. That's temperatures and humidity as well. I think that's everything covered. There we go, everybody. That was this week's grow guides, all about temperature and humidity. Just like any other of the grow guides that we've had, all you have to do, if you have any questions or you want to make any comments on this episode, head over to percysgrowroom.com/forum and you can start a thread there. You will, of course, have to be a member, but it's 100% free to be a member and 100% free to sign up. So come along, get involved with the community. If you have any questions, just start a thread. It's really easy to do, and it will be great to see you over there and become part of the community. Don't forget, again, we have the live session with Tommy Chong. You can go over to youtube.com/highonhomegrown. You'll find our channel there and you'll be able to see the link for the live stream on the front page of the channel. So you can click on that and click set reminder to make sure that you don't forget. Next week's Grow Guides is going to be all about topping and training cannabis plants. So this is going to be an interesting one. So make sure you tune in for that next Friday. But of course, we have the live show on Sunday, which starts at 9 o'clock UK time. We have the live session, the happy birthday session with Tommy Chong on Monday, which also starts at 9 o'clock UK time, 5 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific. Make sure you're there. We have the cannabis news coming out on Monday too. We have an interview on Wednesday, and we have the grow guides on Friday. Every week, same thing. Hope you enjoyed the episodes. Thanks for listening. Thanks for downloading. We massively appreciate it. And we hope to see you there on Sunday for the live show. But if not, we'll see you there on Monday for the Tommy Chong birthday party. Nice. Have a good weekend, everybody. Stay high, stay safe, stay high and homegrown. We'll see you on Sunday. Goodbye.